welcome back to Uncle John's Gun Masterclass. Here we have the famed, fabled, legendary 1911 semi-automatic pistol invented by John Moses Browning in Utah in the United States. Chambered for the Colt 45 ACP. Why is the 1911 so popular? The primary reason is this cartridge. Now, you may not think anything much about it, but let me compare it to another cartridge. The one in my left hand is for the 380, which is a cartridge suited for smaller semi-automatic pistols, such as the Walther PPK and others, the Sig Sauer P232 and others. Let's look again now at a 9mm round. So there are the three, probably the three most popular handgun bullets if we ignore the 38 Special for a moment. This fella here is heavy, it's slow, and it packs an enormous punch. And that's why the 1911 is so popular as a firearm. What is this thing here? This is the takedown tool, and it fits on the front of the gun, and in the next video we'll be looking at that. Here is the magazine. The gun comes with 2 magazines with a capacity of 8 rounds in each, plus 1 in the chamber, so the total capacity of the gun is 9. Now that is much less than some other weapons. For example, some 9mm semi-automatic pistols can hold 17 rounds in the magazine, plus 1 in the chamber equals 18. So again, what makes the 1911 so popular, bearing in mind its limited magazine capacity? Again, it's this fella here, a 230 grain, almost ½ inch diameter lump of lead that will come flying at you at about 850 feet per second, and it doesn't ask you to get out of the way. Gun people talk about the stopping power of the bullet. The stopping power of that bullet is considerable. Here's one that is fired, and you can see the rifling marks on it. That's been fired into and through several pieces of wood. The bullet has remained remarkably intact. I think in fact this was one dug out of the soil, which is why it's so intact. You can see the rifling marks there on the round. That lump of lead coming at you at 800 or 900 feet per second is going to do a lot of damage, and this gun, a bullet from this gun is more likely to kill than perhaps any other gun, perhaps except of course the larger caliber weapons that are available. Smith & Wesson are making some very large caliber handguns now for protection against bears and other wildlife, but this round is a good all-round round and would actually be moderately useful against bear at short range. So let's load the magazine. These magazines are much easier to load than 9mm magazines. The spring pressure is less, the bullet is larger. It's altogether a more civilized affair, and you get witness holes here for each round that you put in, and they're facing towards you as well, so you don't need to turn the thing around to see what's on the other side, to see if you're near the magazine's capacity. And one more. There we are, fully loaded magazine, and then we do this to make sure that the bullets are seated against the back plane of the magazine. So here's the weapon. The first thing to do when picking up a weapon for the first time is to handle it safe. And that means to make sure that the gun is pointed safe and that there's nothing in it. This is a single action only weapon. What that means is it can only be fired after the hammer has been cocked, either by manually cocking it or by the slide having traversed back in the normal firing cycle of the weapon. But how do we know that it's safe to handle? This particular version of the 1911 made by Smith & Wesson has a little loaded chamber indicator, but it's difficult to use because you can't feel anything. In poor light you can't see anything, and I'm just going to turn the other light on here to shed some more light on the subject. In poor light you can't see anything. So how do we use it? Well, in short answer, we can't. The only way to check to see if the gun is unloaded is to open the chamber. And we do this, finger off the trigger, trigger finger alongside the trigger guard, not inside the trigger guard, and we pull the slide back. And on the 1911, the recoil spring is very powerful, and which is why most people do it that way. But for demonstration purposes now we're going to do it this way, and we can see that the chamber is clear. I'm going to lock the slide back. The other important thing to make sure when doing that is that there's no magazine in the magazine well here inside the grip, because what would happen if we let the slide fall forward on a magazine, it would strip around from the magazine and place it in the chamber and make a gun that was safe immediately unsafe. So part of the procedure is to check that there's no magazine in the weapon, as well as that the chamber is empty. This is what we do. This fella here is the slide release catch, and it goes in that little notch there. Let's push the slide back and push that up, and that has now held the magazine in the retracted position, and we can now see very clearly that the chamber is empty. We can introduce our finger in there, it's completely clear, and we can also see that the magazine well is clear. So the gun is completely clear of ammunition and is now safe to handle. But in the tradition of these videos, we're now going to make it unsafe to handle by loading some ammunition. So here is our magazine that we have previously loaded. We introduce the magazine into the magazine well, and you heard it click into position there, but good practice is to just do that with the heel of our hand to make sure that the magazine has fully engaged. We then load the round into the chamber, and at this point, after we do this, the gun has become hot. It's become very hot, and it needs to be held very carefully. So we get our thumb ready there, and perhaps with the pressure of our other thumb, depending on how strong we are, we push that down. The round has now been stripped from the magazine and placed in the chamber. The hammer is back. The first thing to do is to put the safety on. This little beaver tail safety, as it's called, on the 1911 is what makes it safe to carry in so-called condition 1. This is condition 1. Hammer back, live round in the chamber. On the 1911, it is not recommended that the hammer is lowered on a live round in the chamber. On some semi-automatics it's appropriate to do that, but this is specifically advised against in the manual. So always follow the manufacturer's instructions. Do not lower the hammer on a live round in the chamber. So having made the gun unsafe and then safer by putting the safety on, how do we render it completely safe? Okay, as with all weapons, finger away from the trigger. We press on the magazine release catch here. The magazine falls clear and we put it safely to one side. We then have a round in the chamber which we need to eject. Now this ejector rod here, let me point to it with a cleaning tool. That's the, sorry, ejector rod. It's not an ejector rod, this is the ejector. This is what drags the bullet out of the chamber. There's one of the bullets. That's how we know there's a round in the chamber, because we've just put one in. It's sitting in there. As the slide is pulled back, the end of the ejector catches in the rim of the bullet and it pulls it out like that. Now when the gun is firing a normal round, I was using the wrong caliber of bullet, here's a 45 shell. When the gun is firing a normal round, this thing comes flying out like that, and you have to be careful that no one is standing in its way, because it's hot and it's sharp and it's moving at speed. But when we're just cycling the action by hand, it's altogether more pedestrian, and this is what we do. We hold the gun like this and we pull back the slide after having dropped the beaver tail safety there, because the slide won't come back with the beaver tail. Now, there. Did you see it fall clear? It's rotated out from the slide, and it wants to fall down inside the mechanism and come out of the magazine well, but we don't want that to happen. You don't want live rounds falling on the ground, do you, ladies and gentlemen? So let's do that again. We'll put a round in the chamber and we'll then unload it the professional way. So we put it there, put the magazine into the magazine well, we knock it home firmly, we then grip the slide, there's the bullet ready to be loaded, and we let the slide drop and the bullet is now chambered in the weapon. Keep the gun pointed safe, keep finger off trigger. Two very simple things. Point safe, finger off trigger. As long as those two conditions are met, nothing bad can happen. Next thing, this is the safety here that I'm operating with my thumb. One of the reasons why the 1911 is so popular is that the safety is so easy to operate. We then grip the slide with our hand here, again, finger off the trigger, rack the slide, and bullet in hand. Now, what did I do wrong? It was in the sound. Did you hear the sound? What was in the gun when I did that? The magazine. That means there is now another round in the chamber and the gun is now hot. There's no need for panic. Safety on. Magazine removed. Safely put to one side. Grip the gun as before. Pointed safe, finger off trigger. Safety off. Rack the slide. Oops, got that one caught in the mechanism, but there we are. That's because I'm having to hold the gun awkwardly for the benefit of the camera. The bullet safely ejected. Ideally, it would just fall into the palm of our hand. Is the gun safe now? Well, the magazine has been removed. We've removed a round from the chamber. What we need to do is one final check, and the magazine being removed has meant that we did not chamber another round, and so the gun is safe. Let's hold the gun open with the slide release catch again, and we can make doubly certain that the gun is empty. And now the weapon is no more dangerous than a paperweight. So, ladies and gentlemen, loading and unloading the venerable 1911. And as you saw there, it's so easy to make a mistake, to forget that there's a magazine in the gun so that when the slide comes forward, another round is chambered. Let's go through that again. Slide back. If you want to start with a slide back, that's fine. Magazine introduced into the magazine well. Good practice is to push it up firmly with the heel of one's hand and then drop the slide. Ready? There's the round in the top of the magazine, ready to be stripped off and forced into the chamber in a very unceremonious way. Here we go. Ready? Okay, the gun is now hot. Live round in the chamber, hammer back. We make it safe by putting the safety on. Let's look at the safeties on this gun. There is a half cock that I can't demonstrate here, but if in the unlikely event of the hammer falling without the trigger having been pulled, the half cock is designed to catch the hammer and prevent an accidental discharge. The 1911, in common with some other handguns, has a grip safety. Unless you or something is pushing on that thing there, look, the gun cannot be fired. So you've got the beaver tail safety there that physically prevents the hammer from dropping. You've got the grip safety. You've got the half cock position. You've also got a mechanism in here in the firing pin part of the gun which prevents the firing pin moving forward and striking the primer of a cartridge in the event of the gun being dropped. So Mr. Browning thought this thing through very well. Okay, so we're now going to unload the gun. And this time we will do it in the correct order. We will press the magazine release and withdraw the magazine and set it safely to one side. We will then finger off the trigger, remember, gun pointed safe. We will then drop the safety. We will then grip the gun firmly in our right hand, and with our left hand we will rack the slide, and the round that was in the chamber falls safely into our hand, and we set it aside safely, and then we do a final check. Here's the slide release next to my thumb. I push it up after racking the slide. We check that there's no round in the chamber and that the magazine well is clear. The gun is now as safe as a paperweight. This is a big gun. It's a powerful gun. I would suggest that it's not ideal as a first-hand gun, although many people do buy it as a first handgun simply because they like the way it looks, and there's nothing wrong in that, because in the end we're consumers and we buy things that we like. But it's relatively expensive to run. The 45 ACP bullet isn't cheap to buy, and because it's expensive to run, in one sense there's relatively little opportunity to practice economically. Depends on one's economic circumstances, of course, but for many people cheaper options might be the better way to go, especially initially when learning to shoot and so on. So, gun safety is no accident. Think gun safety whenever one is in the presence of firearms or people with firearms. Always remember to act responsibly around firearms. Never use a firearm when intoxicated. Only use firearms when around people who can act responsibly and sensibly, and keep them out of reach of children. Especially important. Children are immensely curious, and something like this, if something like this doesn't whet their appetite, then nothing will. But again, it's just like a car. Kids get into cars and drive cars. Kids will get into guns and they'll play with them. They can't hurt themselves if you've emptied it of ammunition and kept the ammunition separately, but you should still store the gun away from children and introduce them to weapons once they're able to grasp the basic safety concepts, and then they can learn to shoot and shoot very well. So there we are. Uncle John's Gun Masterclass, loading and unloading the venerable 1911 semi-automatic pistol. Thank you for watching. All the best. Bye-bye.